Hello. We are here today to talk about name and gender marker changes in New York. Thank you for joining us at the Long Island Trans and Non-Binary Expo. A little bit of a disclaimer here. This presentation is only current as of the date of its recording, which is April 23rd, 2021. And the information provided here is informational only. It's not legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship, even though I adore you all. A bit of a roadmap, just a hello. My name is Charlie Arrowood. I use they, them pronouns. I am an attorney in New York. I work primarily on name and gender marker changes, and I'm also name change project counsel at the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund. So in my private practice, I do individual representation for folks. And then in my TILDEF capacity, I connect folks with pro bono free attorney assistance if they financially qualify for TILDEF services. We'll talk about the courts during COVID and how things have changed a little bit. And then name and gender marker changes in context. So court ordered name changes versus common law name changes, the document change process for state and federal documents, and a few other resources that are available. And then we'll do Q&A in the chat since this is recorded. So a note about the courts during COVID. Some in-person operations have resumed, including that self-represented name change petitioners can file in person in both Nassau and Suffolk and in Manhattan. Manhattan Civil Court is processing most name changes same day without a hearing. That's also true of Suffolk. You may be required to provide original documentation by mail or email if there's another document the court wants to see, or if they want to see an original of something. And some administrative agencies are taking longer to process document changes right now just because of staffing shortages, or some are pausing entirely. Some are just not doing them in person, so they're doing them by mail instead, like Social Security right now. So the actual kind of process from start to finish for how you get a court-ordered name change and actually change your documents. First, you're going to focus on the name change. In New York City, if you live in any of the 5 boroughs, you can file in any of the 5 boroughs, and I would highly recommend filing in Manhattan. Manhattan Civil Court, they do a lot of trans name changes, and even though there are some extra requirements that they ask for, which we'll talk about in a little bit, they are kind of knowable extras, whereas in other boroughs, sometimes they ask for things that are like totally out of the blue. I've seen them ask for parental consent for an adult name change petitioner. They ask for medical proof, which they're not supposed to. So I would stick to Manhattan Civil, where the only real thing that they ask for that's out of the ordinary is spousal acknowledgement, which I'll talk about later on. Outside New York City, you'll file in the Supreme Court in the county where you live. As you're filing your name change, I would suggest getting started asking your doctor for the doctor's letter that you'll need to change all federal documents and some state documents. So some state documents require that doctor's letter. Others just ask for an affidavit from you or a form signed, notarized. But I would say ask for this doctor's letter early so that once you have your certified name change orders, you have the doctor's letter and you can go ahead and actually change everything. I would ask for 2 to 3 original ink signed copies because the agencies that require these will not accept a scan or a printout. They want to see the page that the doctor put the ink to paper on. And once you get your name change order and you have that doctor's letter, it's time to actually change your documents. So there are different standards for different documents, and we'll talk about that later on. But Social Security now needs to be changed before the DMV, but otherwise everything can be done in any order, even if you haven't updated certain like kind of underlying identity documents that you're using to as proof of ID to change another document. So New York is a common law name change state, which means that you have the right to use whatever name you want in everyday life, as long as it doesn't interfere with the rights of others or promote fraud. So you really only need the court order if you want to change official things like ID documents, account names for the bank, all that. The name change requirements are set out in statute. So most things that they lay out in there shouldn't impact your ability to get your name change signed in New York, but you may need to provide the court with some additional information. There are also, in addition to the statute, additional standards that are set out in the decisions that the court has written. So they can't require medical evidence. They have really very little discretion to deny a name change. They really can only deny it if it's evident that it's for fraudulent purposes. And then there's also a publication requirement in the statute where you need to publish in the newspaper. And there's case law and also a section of the statute that says basically that trans people should be able to get a waiver of that. Even though judges have very little discretion to deny and they're not supposed to ask for medical evidence, some judges abuse their discretion. So they go outside what they're supposed to do. This little paragraph on the right, bald conclusory statements without any factual support are insufficient to establish entitlement to relief. This is a judge who was grumpy that the person did not provide medical evidence. And all they did was say, I'm trans and I want to change my name so that my documents reflect my appearance. And this was not enough for her. This is a paragraph that judges across the state use when they want to ask for medical evidence. They're not supposed to. If you get this, let me know. You can appeal it. You can file a motion. You can withdraw and go to another judge. Whatever it is, it's not like the end of the road if you get a decision like this and they are wrong and will be overturned. There's also this decline to sign thing. This was a minor. Both parents were on board. They were filing on their own without an attorney. And the judge just sent this back on the order. So there was nothing to appeal from. There was no decision explaining why he denied it. And they ultimately had to consult an attorney. We filed a motion and it was granted without any further question. So that's, even though the name change process is doable on your own without an attorney, there are little things that pop up, whether it's these sorts of things, or if you have a more complicated case and might need some more advice or hands-on assistance. It's sometimes helpful to have an attorney involved. If you get that denial asking for additional medical evidence or any sort of denial, really, you can go up to the kind of middle appeals court and they will find a bunch of judges to overturn that denial. You bring it back to the court and they will have to sign the order. So this is not, if you get your name change denied by the court, it is not the end of the road. There are different options that you have to reopen the case or to start a new case or whatever it may be so that you can actually move forward and get your name changed. The New York State court website has a do-it-yourself program, but I do not like it for a variety of reasons. I've put the link there in case that is what you opt to go with, but you can always contact me for cleaner, better templates. So there are separate forms for adults and minors. There are separate forms for inside New York City and outside New York City. It does not allow you to ask for a publication waiver request in the DIY program. I have language that I plug in, and then I also have language in the order that you're going to give the court that gives them the option to very easily waive that publication requirement. So if you go through the DIY program, it doesn't even give you the option to make that request of the court. New York City allows you to ask for a fee waiver request if you can't afford the court fees. New York State, outside that city court system, this program does not give you that template. So again, if you need that, reach out to me. And it's also not for more complicated cases. So for example, if there's a non-consenting parent, if there's a safety risk at play, if there's a complicated criminal history that you need to get into, things like that, you may want to get an attorney involved, at least to kind of review everything. In New York City, actual costs are about $130 if you're required to publish. Outside New York City, across the rest of the state, costs are about $300 if you're required to publish. And again, my email address is at the bottom. So if you need the templates or have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. So preparing the actual name change petition. You want to list any misspellings or variations on ID documents as AKAs, also known as. So if, for example, the State Department made a typo on your passport and you're going to need to change that passport, you want to have that name as an AKA so that when you go send your order to the State Department, they can't say, well, this isn't the same person. Also, like if you have a typo on a driver's license, or some documents have a middle initial and others don't, a middle name and others don't. You want to include all of that in there so that all of that stuff is tied up neatly and it's very clear that you are the person that the order is talking about. You want to specify first, middle, and last where there's any doubt. So if someone has 2 middle names, 2 last names, whatever it is, you want to say exactly which name is which so that the order is giving you the right name. And make sure it's correct in both the petition and the order. So in New York City, the court is going to generate that order and then give it to you to review. So just make sure everything is accurate. And outside New York City, you're going to actually provide the court with a proposed order that they'll just sign. So you want to make sure that the name that you are asking to adopt is the right name. Same thing with like accents. If you have an accent in your name, in New York City, they will have to write that in. So you need to specifically ask for it and confirm that it is on there when you walk out with your order, because it gets complicated to reopen it and ask for it to be changed. If you are submitting your own proposed order outside of New York City, you can just add that accent in as you type it, and they will just sign what it is. I will say that a lot of administrative agencies that print ID documents print in all caps. So, and you'll be familiar with this if you have an accent in your name already. They're not able to put an accent on a lot of documents. So that will still be your legal name, but the accent may not show up on certain documents. Judgments and liens, you only need to disclose judgments filed in court. So you don't need to list private debt, credit card debt, student debt, unless it has resulted in a judgment that was filed in court. If you're a party to a pending legal proceeding, whether you're suing someone or being sued, you need to include that information as well, just enough for the court to find the case, to know where it was filed, to know when it was filed, what judge it's before, and that includes pending criminal matters. So I'm going to talk in a minute about convictions, but that's a different thing than if you got arrested and you are awaiting trial, sentencing, whatever it is, some resolution of that criminal case. You likely need to disclose that. And that is, so criminal history, you only need to report actual misdemeanor convictions and felony convictions, so not violations. But for the pending matters, if you have any sort of pending matter, even if it's a violation, so a traffic stop or something, you do need to disclose that under pending matters. But you don't need to disclose it as a conviction unless it was a misdemeanor conviction or a felony conviction. You want to attach a certificate of disposition. So it's not a full criminal record. It's just a document showing that your case is resolved, and that can be obtained from the clerk's office in the county where the conviction occurred. Bankruptcy, if you filed for bankruptcy and it has been discharged, you want to just include that decision, or at least reference it, tell the court when and where it was issued, and then, make it available in case the court wants it. You don't necessarily have to put it in your actual petition as an exhibit. And that's same for the certificate of dispositions. You want to, because this is potentially going to be a public document, if publication is not waived, you want to make sure you have as little private information in there as possible. So if it's public and you've attached that bankruptcy disposition and that certificate of disposition for a criminal conviction, that's a lot of extra information that's now part of the public record and doesn't necessarily need to be. So you can reference it in there. And then if the court, calls and says, hey, we want to see this, you can email it to them, you can mail it to them, whatever it is. But it's not part of the actual petition. Family relations, no consent of the spouse is required by the statute, but New York City does this thing where it requires a signed and notarized acknowledgement saying, I know about this name change from a spouse. We're fighting with them about this because it's totally outside the scope of the statute, and you can't condition an adult's name change on the consent of someone else. Like, yeah, they call it an acknowledgement, but what would they do if the person refused to sign that? Can't deny a name change just because of that. So we're fighting with them. We're also working on a bill called the Gender Recognition Act that does a whole bunch of things, and included in that is getting rid of this requirement. But I have not encountered this request anywhere else across the state, only Manhattan Civil. But that's like really one of the only weird things that Manhattan Civil requires. Otherwise, it's very kind of straightforward. Child and spousal support needs to be declared if you owe that, and you must tell the court if you are married or divorced. So if you're not married, you would just say, I am not married. If you're filing for someone under 18, someone over 18 needs to serve as the petitioner, but it does not necessarily need to be the parent. The statute only requires that you show the court that you've notified the parent of the name change, or however many legal parents there are. So the person filing for the minor can be someone called a next friend, which is anyone over 18 who's willing to be the petitioner on behalf of this person. You just need to show the court through like a little certified mail receipt, the little green and white receipt, that you have notified the legal parents of the proceeding. The court may give you a hearing date that they want you to notify the parents of. But if there is a non-consenting parent situation, I would suggest at least consulting an attorney and seeing, what your options are, because it sometimes is more complicated if the parents are not consenting. The easiest, most straightforward way to do it is if you can get one parent to be the petitioner and the other parent to submit a consent, a notarized consent affidavit. Obviously, in a lot of circumstances, that's not possible. But the good news is that the standard for a minor name change is that the interests of the minor will be substantially promoted by the change, which is a pretty low bar when it comes to trans kids. It's pretty obvious that the earlier you do this, the better it is for them to settle into it. There are less things to correct and update. There's just less drama if it gets done earlier. And it's also very important for their mental health, for their social well-being, all of it. So even if you have a parent who is going to go to the court and make a stink, they've got to have a better reason than I don't like this. If the minor is 14 or older, you also need to include consent from the minor. Immigration. So everyone, whether you're documented or not, has access to the courts technically, but the judge may require notification to immigration or Homeland Security, and they're allowed to do that. So you want to make sure that your status is current if it's possible to do that. If you're changing your name through the immigration process, you might be able to do that depending on what sort of application you have pending. That avoids having to update documents, but it's not available for all types of immigration proceedings. So I would say definitely, if there is an immigration question of any kind in your case, consult an immigration attorney before you file. There are situations where you can update your name through the immigration process, or get, your court order and then make sure your documents are printed correctly, even if you had applied under an old name. But there are some circumstances where having a name change in the middle could set you back to the beginning of the line, to the end of the line. So just consult an immigration attorney. If you're seeking asylum based on trans status, sometimes proof of a name change can be helpful. So not only is it like proof that you're trans, like I was willing to go through these hoops to get my name changed because I'm trans and I can't go back. But there's also, a lot of people want publication waived and want the record to be sealed for privacy purposes. But if you're seeking asylum based on your trans status, sometimes it's helpful to have that publication and have the record be open. So you can say, I really can't go back home, because this is now out there, the record is open, it's accessible. If someone finds out, I'm in trouble, all that. So bottom line for immigration, consult an immigration attorney before you file. Publication is a legal notice, a little classified ad that's put in the newspaper. This is called an affidavit of publication that you see on the side of your screen. It is basically a clipping of the actual publication that happened and a sworn statement from the person who printed it or whatever at the newspaper saying that it was done. This is what you will bring back to the court to get your certified orders if publication was required. Publication is $35 in the Irish Echo in New York City. This is the newspaper that the judges generally give, but you can specifically ask for it in your petition if you're not asking for a waiver, or you could say, like, if a waiver is not granted and I'm required to publish, I would like to publish in the Irish Echo. Outside New York City, publication is generally $45 to $65, and the judge will write in the order what newspaper you need to publish in, and they'll give you contact information usually. If they do not, or if you have other questions, I have a whole spreadsheet with all the local newspapers, the prices, the contact emails, all that. So reach out if you have any questions. The publication blurb itself has a lot of personal information in it. And so if you are uncomfortable with this, that might be an indication that you want to ask for the publication waiver. It's got old name, new name, date of birth, place of birth, and address. We've had success just putting in the month and year of birth and just the city and state of your address, so not your full address. But for the most part, for trans folks, judges tend to grant publication waivers when they're requested. The only exception is there's one judge in Manhattan who does not grant publication waivers, even if you have a specific threat against you. And so you can always just withdraw and come back another day, or if you want to fight him, I am incredibly happy to fight him. So contact me. Outside New York City, it's a little more kind of hodgepodge. You never really know whether the judge is going to grant it or not. But in Suffolk, sometimes they grant it even if you haven't requested it, if they see that the reason you're changing your name is your transition. In Nassau, it used to be a little more iffy, but actually recently there are a bunch of new judges on, and they have been very friendly. So I would say conservatively that it's likely that you'd be able to get a waiver if you request it in both Nassau and Suffolk. So you can request the publication waiver if you feel like publication would jeopardize your personal safety based on a totality of the circumstances. So it's not that you have personally faced some sort of discrimination, safety risk, whatever it is. There is a generalized threat against trans people based on their trans status. I fall into this category. It would be dangerous for me to have all this information out there. Judges do have a lot of discretion to say no, but you want to put that paragraph in there so that if they say no and you want to escalate it and fight it, there's a good record, and the higher court can say, no, they showed you enough under the law. I have a specific paragraph that has case law and stats, and you can add personal details if that's relevant. And you would plug that into the petition. And then there's also language in the order where the judge can just check off yes or no. Whereas if you use the do-it-yourself form, there's no option for the judge to say that publication is waived. If it's denied, you can appeal it. You can file a motion with the same judge. There are a few different options, but it will prolong the name change process. So a lot of times, even if someone requests it, if it gets denied, they say, forget it, just publish. I want my name change done. And when I did my own name change before I really knew how to do all this, I was in Nassau County, and I found out I could ask for a publication waiver like right after I filed. And I called the court and I spoke to a guy who I now have a very close working relationship with. And I said, can I put in an affidavit asking for this waiver now. And he said, no, you can start over and pay another $210 and include this from the beginning, or you can acknowledge that no one is reading the Roslyn news and move on with your life. I did the latter, hasn't been a problem. It's kind of fun to have a little newspaper clipping, whatever. But it's a personal, totally personal decision. If you feel strongly about it, you should absolutely seek the waiver. Not to mention, it means that you can get your certified copies as soon as the order is signed. So it saves you a couple weeks. So actually filing. In New York City, it's $65 to purchase an index number. You're filing in civil court. Outside New York City, it's $210 because you're filing in Supreme Court. It's just a different court. And there's something called a request for judicial intervention that you need outside New York City. It usually comes with a fee, but for name changes, there is no fee. So you should just be at that 65 or 210 in actual costs plus certified copy fees, which we'll talk about in a bit. If you cannot afford those fees, you can request to proceed as a poor person. Not great language, but that's what they call it. You want to show the court proof of income or lack thereof. So any benefits you receive, disability, unemployment, Social Security, whatever it is, school registration to show that you are a full-time student with no income, that kind of stuff. It may cover certified copies outside New York City if you put language in your proposed order. So the same way for the petition, you're going to submit the ask and then the proposed order for them to sign. You're going to do the same for the fee waiver if you're asking for that. You give the affidavit in support asking for it, and then the order itself that the judge will sign. I have a sentence in my orders saying that this order entitles the person to 5 free certified copies. In New York City, if you get a fee waiver, they generally give you 3 to 6, depending on who's on. And you usually still need to pay the publication fee, even if you get this fee waiver, except in New York City and Nassau County, the New York Law Journal will publish for free if you prove that you've gotten that fee waiver signed. So outside, in Suffolk, the New York Law Journal is not considered a designated newspaper, so you'll have to publish in whatever newspaper they say. But if you're asking for a fee waiver in Nassau or in Manhattan, you can ask in your petition that they have you publish in the New York Law Journal so that you don't have to pay the fee. New York City, you're going to file at 111 Center Street in Manhattan. You purchase an index number at the clerk's office downstairs, and then you go up to pay you purchase an index number. You bring everything to the clerk's window, and then you go upstairs to get the index number in room 225. Right now, they're generally granting same day without a hearing under COVID procedures. So if it's a straightforward case and you get there early enough in the day, you may be out and done and have your certified copies by that afternoon. Outside New York City, you purchase an index number at the clerk's office for your county's Supreme Court. Some will take everything from you there. In Nassau, they tend to do that. And then in Suffolk, they tend to ask you to go up to the judge yourself. In Nassau, you're actually going to end up leaving all your paperwork for a couple weeks, or, well, probably more right now because they're short-staffed, but you leave it and then they mail it back to you. In Suffolk, you bring it upstairs, then you bring it back downstairs. They send it off to the clerk's office in Riverhead, and then you can request certified copies. So there's a little more legwork in Suffolk and you have to be there in person, but it gets wrapped up quicker. In Nassau, you're either, the clerk's office is either sending it over to the court or they're asking you to walk it across the street to the court. And then you just leave it there. No matter where you're filing, you want to bring the original or certified copy of your birth certificate and photo ID. If you don't have a copy of your birth certificate, you can order one from vitalcheck.com, and that's CHEK. There's no C at the end. Bring any other original documents that you reference in your petition. And if you have questions, you can check with the local law library or court help center in your county, or you can reach out to me. I can probably provide a little bit more information than they are allowed to provide as far as kind of local details. So once the order is signed, the order will tell you if you need to publish and if you need to notify anyone else of your name change. If you need to publish, the judge will tell you how and who to contact, and you will return that affidavit of publication from a few slides ago when you go to pick up your orders. You'll bring that to the same place that you bought the index number at or handed everything in. If you need to notify anyone else, you do that using this little green certified mail receipt. This is the one I was talking about with the notification to non-consenting parents. All you need to do is mail a photocopy of the order to whoever they tell you to, and bring this little green receipt back when you go pick up your certified copies. You don't need to show them proof of receipt. So you don't need to do return receipt requested or anything like that. To get your certified copies, once you've brought that stuff in, you can order in person at the clerk's office or by mail. You just need to include payment. They're $6 a piece in New York City, $5 a piece outside New York City for the most part, definitely in Nassau and Suffolk. And just confirm in your local county what the accepted payment methods are. Because if you're going in person in Nassau, you can use a credit card. If you're going in person in Suffolk or even doing it by mail, they don't accept credit cards. And in New York City, they don't accept personal checks. So just confirm, and you can ask me if you are not able to get a hold of the court. If you've published in the newspaper and your record will be unsealed, so publicly accessible, I would say 5 copies at first is totally sufficient. That should take care of changing the big documents, where some of them give it back to you. So you're not actually losing a copy every time you change something. Others kind of hold on to it for a while and then mail it back. Others will keep it. So you want to make sure you have enough copies to actually change everything you need to change. And that's why if the record is sealed, and it's a little bit more complicated to get copies later, I would suggest having 7 to 10 up front. Don't remove any staples or receipts because that invalidates the certification. All New York State and New York City documents and federal documents are changed administratively. So the only thing you're doing through the court system as a resident of New York is changing your name with, getting a court order to change your name. Everything else is done through paperwork outside the court system. You're interacting directly with the agency with whom you want to change a document. For the documents that require a doctor's letter, if you are a New York resident and you were born in New York, the only letter you'll need is one that says you've had appropriate clinical treatment. That doesn't mean anything in particular. It can mean you came out to your doctor, you were on hormones, you had some sort of surgery, whatever. New York doesn't care. The federal government doesn't care. It's kind of just an extra barrier that they've put in place to make it more complicated to change your documents. And it's especially unfortunate because for the trans community in particular, a lot of people don't have access to an affordable doctor, an affirming doctor. They don't have transportation to a doctor. So this becomes a very big barrier for people. And they actually just got rid of this requirement for New York State and New York City birth certificates. So you no longer need a doctor's letter for those, but you still do need one for your federal documents and for the DMV. You need to change, and it can be from any MD or DO, so it doesn't necessarily need to be from someone treating you for anything transition related. It can be from a general practitioner, it can be from a specialist, whatever. Other than doing Social Security before the DMV, which is a new requirement because of the Real ID Act, you can change your documents in any order, even if the documents that you're using as like proof of identification don't say the right thing yet. Like if you haven't changed your birth certificate, that's fine. If you have your court order and that doctor's letter, those things together mean that you can get the proper information on a new ID or a new document. There is no monolithic database that knows that you have changed your name. So you walk out of the court with that name change order, nobody knows about it. you need to actually go around and play whack-a-mole, change passport, social security, DMV, birth certificate, school records, bank records, the whole, anything that has your name on it, you need to affirmatively go and tell them. There are some systems that are tied together on the back end, but they don't really talk to each other well enough to update. Kind of the only one that I'm familiar with that does, I believe, update automatically is Motor Voter. So if you change your driver's license, that should change your voter registration, but I would still contact the Board of Elections to confirm. And you can look up your voter registration online. Some people don't change their birth certificate. There are some places where they don't allow it. There are some places where they only allow it with proof of genital surgery, which is not in the cards for everyone. And then some people just don't want to change it or don't feel like they need to. You can change your passport instead of your birth certificate and use that in most circumstances instead of the birth certificate. So, you know, if you were born in a place that requires a court order to change your birth certificate and New York does not issue those because we do things administratively, something we're working on in the Gender Recognition Act bill that we're trying to get passed, that would tell the court you can issue these orders. You can just change your passport and use that instead of a birth certificate. X gender markers are available on some documents and not others at this time. There are about 23 jurisdictions across the country that allow it on either a birth certificate or driver's license, photo ID. Actually, just today or yesterday, New Jersey announced that effective immediately, it would be available on photo IDs. It was already available on birth certificates. New York State and New York City birth certificates allow it, but the DMV does not yet. They are being sued and there's pending litigation. They are saying that it should happen within the next year or so, but we can't really say exactly when that will be. The excuse for a lot of these agencies is that the computer systems are from like 1940. And it's like, well, so update your computer systems, because there are now, you know, half the population lives in a jurisdiction that allows for this X marker. So there has to be a way for them to get accurate documentation across the board. There's also a lawsuit going on against the State Department to update passports. There's some conversation at Social Security. And so right now at the federal level, nothing provides for an X, but everybody's working on it. Birth certificate changes. The change is requested from the jurisdiction where you were born, regardless of where you currently live. So whoever issued that document, that's who you're going to ask to change it. As I mentioned, the requirements differ by jurisdiction, by state. So some require a letter, some do self-attestation, which is just that sworn statement from you. For the ones that require a letter, even that has differing standards. So there's that appropriate clinical treatment letter. Some states require proof of surgery, and that can differ. So some states will allow, like if a doctor calls a hormone or blocker insertion an outpatient surgery, that is sometimes sufficient. When in New Jersey, when they used to have a doctor's letter requirement with a surgical requirement, young people were able to get their hormone blocker considered surgery. In other states, sometimes they specifically want proof of genital surgery, which again, not always in the cards for people. So, you know, for whatever reason. So I would say in that situation, just get your passport updated and use that instead. Other states require a court order. That's not available in New York right now because we do things administratively. Judges say, well, I don't have, you know, authority to issue this order. So the Gender Recognition Act has a provision in there telling judges you can issue this and you must if requested. Some jurisdictions don't allow birth certificate changes at all. They're being sued. They keep losing. As I mentioned before, New York State and New York City each issue separate birth certificates, but both now accept just the notarized affidavit from the applicant. So you don't need medical information, medical proof or anything to change a New York State or New York City birth certificate. Some of the other documents that you'll need to change: DMV ID, passport, school, immigration documents, which are super expensive to change, bank, mortgage, deed, insurance, And all of those private entities really have different standards for what they want in order to make this change. When my wife called to change my name with her insurance, they automatically changed my gender marker, which I would not have done. But it doesn't really matter. So I just left it as is. The one thing to be conscious of with insurance is it can change your rates, and it can also change, like if you are asking for health insurance purposes for some sort of sex specific service. So a pap smear or a mammography or a prostate exam, if your gender marker doesn't match in the system, the gender marker that usually requests those services, it might automatically get kicked back the first time. That can be fixed with just a phone call. They add a modifier code, and it shouldn't continue happening. If it does continue happening, that is against the law in New York State, so you can file a complaint. Contact me if that becomes an issue. It is complicated to change the name on your deed because of chain of title issues. So, the old name will have to be visible on there somewhere as like an FKA, formerly known as, but it is doable. You just go to your town clerk. And so what I was mentioning before with like different standards for what different private entities want, some will just change it with a scan of a name change. Some want to see the actual raised seal certified copy in person. Some want a doctor's letter for the gender marker change. Some want to see a changed birth certificate for a gender marker change, or some sort of other changed photo ID. So just consult with your individual, whatever entity you are trying to get things changed with. And frankly, if they refuse to change a name, particularly in the school setting, please reach out to me. New York is a common law name change state. You can go by whatever name you want. School, there are certain things like a diploma or a transcript that are like quote unquote official legal documents. So they need to have whatever name is on your other documents on them. But there's no reason that they can't be using the right name in everyday, back and forth and other like everyday records. And especially once you do have a name change order, if they don't comply with that, that's a problem. And, that goes for transcript, diploma. Even if you've graduated and you're coming back to them before, some districts will say, well, that's not the person who went here. You graduated as this person. That means that your records have to say this. The Division of Human Rights at the state level has said that they want someone to file a complaint about this because it is unlawful for them to do that. And they want a decision on paper so that they can point to it and other people can point to it and say, you can't do this. You need to make the change when it's requested. So here are a bunch of resources. On my page, this will link to post name change instructions. So once you actually get your name change order, this will have instructions for what to do to change each, like most of the most common documents. The Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund Name Change Project, as I mentioned before, we connect those who financially qualify with pro bono or free name change attorney assistance. Pride for Youth has a program called Project Thrive for folks up to age 30, where they do, if you don't need like full-on attorney representation, but you would like someone to kind of walk you through the name change process, that is something that Pride for Youth offers. So they'll fill out the paperwork with you, give you instructions about where to file, all that. And then generally, if they have questions, they reach out directly to me. So we have a very, very close working relationship. The NYU Law School ID Documents Project will usually, they have some funds available to pay for costs of updating documents or court costs. They're currently paused, but keep checking back because that is often an option to get a little bit of that stuff covered if you need it. The National Center for Transgender Equality ID Document Center, enormously helpful. I refer to it on a daily basis. It's on my bookmark tab. They have a state-by-state breakdown of how to change your name and documents in every US jurisdiction and territory. So if you were born in Florida, for example, you can go down to their drop-down menu, go to Florida, and they will hyperlink to all the documents that you need and the instructions that you need to change a Florida birth certificate. And that goes for every state. So they have instructions on how to go through the name change process, how to change your information on an ID document, on your photo ID, so the DMV, and then also birth certificates. The last few folks down here are non-Long Island. Milo practices across the state, but primarily upstate. And so he's a good person to know if you have some sort of employment issue or other sort of discrimination issue. He's especially interested in the school context if anyone runs into problems. And the other folks are just pro bono legal assistance for certain counties upstate. So that wouldn't be super relevant here. But I figured I would put them on there in case we get any folks from outside Long Island. And they all do kind of the same stuff. They do name change assistance and other sort of, if you have any sort of other legal questions, you can inquire with them. That is it. We will do Q&A in the chat. Again, here's my contact information if you need it. And thank you for joining us. And I hope you're enjoying the expo. Have a great rest of your day.